Russia and Iran now appear to be tightening pressure on global energy markets, raising questions over whether Moscow and Tehran are jointly trying to squeeze the West. President Vladimir Putin has halted diesel exports after repeated Ukrainian drone strikes crippled key Russian refineries, sending shockwaves through global energy markets. As the Iran conflict intensifies and the Strait of Hormuz remains under pressure, Ukraine's attacks are now adding fresh strain to the global oil supply. Russia has imposed a ban on diesel exports after repeated Ukrainian strikes disrupted several of the country's key oil refineries, according to a CNN report. The Kremlin said the export ban is intended to protect domestic fuel supplies as shortages continue to worsen across parts of Russia. Long queues have formed at fuel stations across several Russian regions despite official claims that fuel reserves remain sufficient. On July 8, President Vladimir Putin ordered fuel subsidies for residents in occupied Crimea, saying ordinary citizens should not bear the burden of the crisis. Ukraine's long-range drone campaign has repeatedly targeted Russian refineries, oil depots, and critical fuel logistics infrastructure. The repeated attacks have triggered a growing fuel crisis inside Russia, forcing Moscow to introduce emergency measures to stabilize supplies. Energy analysts say the latest export ban now applies to both producers and traders, effectively freezing Russia's diesel exports. President Putin has instructed the Russian government to provide fuel subsidies for residents living in Russian-occupied Crimea. The Kremlin has acknowledged soaring fuel prices as Ukrainian strikes continue disrupting supply routes into the peninsula. Sevastopol's governor admitted that the city is currently receiving only about one-third of its normal daily fuel requirements. Fuel shortages and power disruptions are now spreading across Crimea as Ukraine continues increasing pressure on Russian logistics. Ukraine says its drones have struck at least 35 Shadow Fleet tankers, cargo ships, and supply vessels operating in the Sea of Azov. Kiev says the objective is to cut fuel deliveries supporting Russian military operations inside occupied Crimea. Ukraine's campaign is increasingly targeting Russia's wartime economy rather than focusing only on frontline military positions. The worsening fuel crisis comes as Russia continues launching missiles and drones against targets across Ukraine. NATO allies have pledged additional military support to Kiev as both sides intensify their long-range strike campaigns. With refineries damaged and fuel exports suspended, Ukraine appears determined to shift the economic cost of the war back onto Russia. Ship traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has nearly come to a standstill after America-Iran strikes, with commercial operators, insurers and flag states treating the waterway as too hazardous for routine transits until security conditions stabilize. The vessel movements through the key waterway dropped sharply on July 9, according to reports that tracked AIS silence, port diversions and a marked reduction in scheduled tanker passages as shipmasters rerouted or delayed sailings. Ship tracking data showed most observed movements were limited to an Iran-approved route, indicating merchant traffic was clustering along corridors designated by Tehran as relatively safer while avoiding broader navigable areas of the strait. The route was located closer to the northern side of the strait, according to the report, a constriction that increases navigational risk by squeezing larger vessels into narrower channels with fewer options for evasive maneuver. The U.S.-supported Omani corridor reportedly saw little to no ship activity, suggesting that alternate routes promoted by outside partners have not yet been widely adopted by commercial operators wary of insurance, port access and escort limitations. The details of shipping in the Strait of Hormuz were reported by Bloomberg, which compiled AIS records, industry statements and on-the-ground reporting to document the rapid collapse in normal maritime throughput. Remember, shipping unions had designated the Strait of Hormuz as a war zone, a classification that raises insurance premiums, deters crews from accepting voyages and forces additional safety protocols for any vessel operating in the area. The strait's status as a war zone was set to be reassessed weekly until July 9, reflecting the volatile security picture and the industry's need to continuously update risk postures in response to strikes, warnings, and diplomatic shifts. At least 14 seafarers have been killed and some 40 ships attacked since the war began on February 28, a casualty and damage tally that has driven operators to minimize exposure and avoid the region where possible. Iran, under the MOU signed with America, was set to slowly reopen the Strait of Hormuz, an element of the interim deal intended to restore commercial traffic while diplomatic talks advanced toward a more durable settlement. However, on July 8 the U.S. president declared the interim deal over, and fresh Iranian strikes followed, events that abruptly reversed expectations for reopening and pushed maritime actors back into defensive postures and route suspensions.
To me, I think it's over. I don't want to deal with them anymore. They're scum. You know what scum is? They're scum. They're sick people. They're led by sick people. And they're vicious, violent people. And if they had a nuclear weapon, they'd use it. As far as I'm concerned, it's over.
IRGC units reportedly launched strikes on multiple U.S. bases across the Middle East, with state-aligned channels claiming coordinated attacks aimed at degrading American force posture and signaling Tehran's willingness to target forward facilities in retaliation for recent confrontations. An IRGC-linked channel claimed that Iran launched a large-scale missile attack targeting multiple U.S. military bases across the Middle East. The channel said several American military facilities were struck, though it did not disclose the exact locations of the targets. Kuwait's military confirmed that its air defense systems were actively intercepting hostile missiles and drones over the country. The Kuwaiti army said, and I quote, "The Kuwaiti air defenses are currently confronting hostile missile and drone attacks." The General Staff of the Army notes that if explosion sounds are heard, they are the result of air defense systems intercepting the hostile attacks. Everyone is kindly requested to adhere to the security and safety instructions issued by the competent authorities. Unquote. Kuwait said the explosions heard across the country were caused by its air defense systems intercepting incoming threats. The Kuwaiti army urged residents to strictly follow official safety instructions as the attacks unfolded. Tasnim News reported that the U.S. Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain was targeted once again on July 9th. Local sources quoted by Tasnim also reported fresh explosions in Bahrain following Iran's latest attacks. The latest wave of strikes marks a significant escalation in the rapidly worsening military confrontation between the United States and Iran. The Persian Gulf has now emerged as the latest flashpoint in the expanding regional conflict.